I've had encounters with the paranormal since I was about 4 years old. They all stopped when I was around 11, and most of the experiences I had were creepy, but they never really caused me great fear. Anyway, fast forward to my mid-20s. I was married at the time, and we owned a home right on the river when we bought the house. A lot of work needed to be done to it. My ex was really handy and did most of the work himself. We were living with his parents at the time, so I wasn't in the home while it was being remodeled. My ex would on occasion say that he felt creeped out and uncomfortable at the house by himself sometimes. As soon as the house was finished, I had a priest come over to bless the house, just in case. For a couple of years, I felt nothing paranormal. One afternoon, my ex was working on the yard, and I was in the bedroom reading. I saw a shadow in the hallway looking out the room. I thought it was my husband and said, "Hey, I see your shadow, babe. Not funny." The shadow doesn't move. I again say, "It's not funny. I see you. Stop being a jerk." Nothing. No movement. So I get up from the bed to confront my ex, and there's no one. I go to look for my ex, and his car is gone. He wasn't even home. I'm so freaked out that I go back to the bedroom and close the door. I told my ex about it, and he didn't hesitate to believe me. He said he had similar experiences. The very next week, I'm taking a nap on the couch. I have this crazy, scary dream where I'm in the middle of a forest, and I'm there with a man in a dark trench coat and a brim hat. I couldn't see his face, but he had a gun and he shot me in the chest. I fall to the ground, and as I'm laying there, he's watching over me. I tell myself to just let go, and when I do that, I stop breathing in real life. I gasp, waking up from my dream. I collect myself for a second, and then I hear the front door handle jiggling. I remember how relieved I was, thinking it was my husband, but then I didn't hear the door open. I just heard a low hissing sound, and then I saw the shadow and it was coming towards me, getting larger as it got closer. The hissing got louder as well. I was panicking, but saw that the remote to my overhead fan was within reach, and I turned that sucker on. It almost looked like smoke that was leaving the room when the light came on. I can honestly tell you, I don't think I've ever been more terrified in my life. In 2003, I was a 20-year-old recently single mother of a 1-year-old son. When the father of my then child, now children, moved out, I had no desire to live alone in my apartment. So my two best friends, Heather and Jamie, moved in. Jamie also had a son who was a little over a year old at the time. The five of us made a little home, and things were good. At some point, and I've tried so hard to remember how it started, but can't, Jamie, Heather and I became kind of addicted to using a Ouija board. I had bought this board at Kmart for like $8 one year, and I think it was for that reason that I didn't take it very seriously. Boy, was I wrong. When we first started using it, I remained pretty skeptical, even as it began to tell us some pretty accurate and intimate things. Looking back, I always thought that Jamie was the one moving the oracle. I knew it wasn't Heather because at times, she was legitimately afraid. One day, I fought with the father of my sons, super upset and crying. I hopped in my car by myself and just went for a cry drive. At the peak of being upset and alone in the car, I said aloud, "Is this my destiny? Or am I supposed to fight to save this?" I went home to the loving arms of my friends. As we did most nights, we got out the board. The very first thing the board said that night was, "Destiny changes with every breath." Neither of them could have possibly known what I had just said in the car. That was the point when my skepticism started to fade away. We continued to use the board pretty much every night, and it continued to tell us things that would come true. At this point, the entity had claimed to be our collective spirit guide, Ben. One night, we had a male friend at the apartment. He was asleep on the couch behind us as we sat in our circle on the floor around the board. Heather remembered something from that night that I didn't, until she mentioned it recently. She felt a cold pressure wrap around her arm and then shoot up her nose. She started to freak out. But as I already told you, she was the scaredy cat of the group. I was more annoyed than worried or scared. We convinced her to sit back down. And that's when the board said something about not being happy that our male visitor was there. Almost immediately, he sat straight up on the couch and said, "What are you doing to me?" He lifted his shirt and he had several tiny handprints all over his chest and stomach. That was likely the point when I realised that we might be dealing with something darker than what it was selling itself as. What I didn't know then is that it would get much worse. We went to the local library and got some books about the occult. We brought them home, but never looked at them. Until one night. The three of us and the two babies had been out somewhere. We came home and put the boys in the playpen. I started running the vacuum. As I was running the vacuum, I heard Heather and Jamie screaming hysterically. I stopped to find out what was happening, and that's when they told me that they had heard a very loud thump, and then a child screaming bloody murder. They thought one of the boys had fallen from the playpen and gotten hurt, but both boys were still peacefully playing where we had left them, and when they went to check. As they're telling me this, I was suddenly overcome by the smell of rotten meat. I'm a bit of a neat freak, and therefore there shouldn't have been anything causing this smell. I started searching high and low for the source of the smell, but it seemed to keep moving every time I got close to it. Meanwhile, Heather grabbed one of the roughly 5 books we had picked up from the library, opened it to a random page, and started reading. She said, "You have to come read this." Annoyed, I replied, "I can't stop until I found where the smell is coming from." Very sternly, she said again, "You have to come read this." I look at her, and she was ghost white with tears streaming down her face. I walked over and took the book from her. The first paragraph of the front page to which she had randomly opened the book said, "The scream of a non-present child, accompanied by the smell of rotten fish, signifies the presence of pure evil." I wish I could tell you what we did in the following minutes. I don't remember. What I do remember is the next day, we took all of the books back to the library and got a Bible. We brought it home, left it open on a chair in the living room, and left for the rest of the day. I'm not even a religious person, but it's funny what you'll do when you're scared. We never used the board in that apartment again. If that story is the cake, this is the icing. Fast forward to June of 2004. I had given birth to my second son in February. Jamie and I were living in a different apartment, and Heather was living with a boyfriend. Heather came to visit, and for whatever reason, we broke out the board. I only remember one question from that day. Heather said to the board, "Jamie has a son. She has 2 sons. When will I ever have children?" And the board replied, "7 for you." So that became a running joke for the next several months. Like, haha, Heather's gonna have 7 kids. Fast forward again, this time to January of 2005. I live with my children in yet another apartment. Jamie has moved in with her now husband, and Heather is living with a different boyfriend. I was laying in bed one night, and 7 for you just popped into my head. Suddenly, it hit me. The board had said that in June, and it was now January. July, August, September, October, November, December, January. 7 months. Duh. Heather is pregnant now. I called her the next day to tell her she was pregnant. She was very adamant that it was not possible. To shorten the back and forth that we did for the next 2 weeks, yes, she absolutely was pregnant. She gave birth to her first son in October of 2005. Since then, we've done the math. She was only about 2 weeks pregnant when I first told her. Although we're still all friends, I don't know a lot about what they've experienced paranormal-wise in the years since. I know that Heather had some pretty scary experiences in a house she lived in up until last year, where a previous tenant had committed suicide. I lived in the parsonage of a church for 10 years, and we had some pretty strange experiences there, including a time that my younger sister and I watched a full grocery bag that was hanging on a doorknob lift off the door until it was completely horizontal and then drop back down. Even my skeptical mom saw shadow figures in that house. Now we're in a new house, and my son and my brother are having some unusual experiences in the basement, which is where their bedrooms are. I surprised my girlfriend with a trip to Cincinnati to see the Newport Aquarium last week. I really wanted to get out of my parents' house, so I booked an Airbnb somewhere on the edge of town for the weekend. The pictures of the apartment seemed nice, and we were both excited to see the town, as well as have a weekend to ourselves. When we arrived, we were a little bit bummed about the state of our accommodation. Aside from the trash unemptied by the last residents, it was clear that the hosts had been very specific about the pictures they had posted online. The apartment was obviously very old, as well as empty. It was bare of furniture except for the essential bed, couch, and modest kitchen supplies. I did a full inspection of the apartment, including spot checking the bed for bed bugs, making sure there was no mold, checking the locks. Lastly, I came around the bathroom, which was in desperate need of remodeling. The shower had stains, the toilet hardly flushed, and the sink barely had any water pressure. It was clearly we had definitely not been sold on a weekend stay in paradise. After day one of exploring the town was over, we were both tired and had climbed into bed. After about an hour of tossing, I realised I had to use the restroom, and this is where things got creepy. I sat down on the toilet and pulled out my phone to scroll through Instagram, when I noticed something move out of the corner of my eye. I looked up from the screen and noticed the bathroom door had opened and was slowly moving till it came to a creaking halt against the shower curtain. I froze for a minute to collect my thoughts and dismissed the incident as a draft moving through. I was sold on that idea until I realised that the shower was now on. The loud noise of the water rushing out of the tap petrified me. On the toilet with my pants around my ankles, I was truly frightened, glued to the seat in terror. I will admit, I froze like a coward. I didn't know what to do. After maybe 7 or so seconds, I got up and turned on the dial on the shower. Terrified, I went back to my room and closed and locked the door. My girlfriend, who had slept through this whole event, was suddenly awoken by my haste to close the door, and I explained to her the whole story. My mind was racing the entire night. I never took my eyes off the door, and I buried myself in bed and covered my ears to block off all possibilities of something happening again, or at least me hearing it. I made it through the night and investigated when the sun gave me courage in the morning. I had left the door open, forgot to flush, and the tap was still dripping in my attempt to flee the scene quickly. I have no excuse for why the shower turned on, and I think now, after 20 years of being alive, I'm now a believer in the things we can't see among us. For reference of this story, about a month ago, I bought an evil eye ring on Etsy. It was nothing special, just a $6 one that had wire wrapped around it. It's the traditional dark blue colour with the eye in the centre of the ring. I had bought this ring right before school was going to start, and hopefully protect me from some of the negative energy of others. I had done all the research beforehand to be respectful of the cultures it came from, along with charging the ring in the blue moon's light and setting intentions with incense. The first time I wore a thin ring, I felt an immense amount of energy. This was before I had cleansed it, and I felt so much that I had to take it off. It made me almost scared to wear it, and I took the right precautions. Everything seemed to be fine. Fast forward to the first time I had worn it, everything was good. I returned home from school and set it on the nightstand right next to my bed. I hopped in the shower, and when I returned, the ring was gone. Confused, I asked my sister if she had touched the ring, as it was just there, and she said she hadn't. At the time, I wasn't super worried, because I lose stuff all the time, especially rings. The next day, I found it on the floor right next to my nightstand, in a place that I know I had checked. I thought nothing of it, and moved on with my day. Here's where it gets a little scary for me. The ring ends up going missing for a few days, up to a week, and then it'll reappear in a spot so obvious that I get scared. This has happened around 3 times already, and it's about 2 months into me owning the thing. This occurrence was kind of my final straw. 2 days ago, I was looking for the ring as it had disappeared once again, even though it was always on my nightstand. I left and thought nothing of it. I searched more when I get home, as I thought it couldn't have gotten that far, and still nothing. I go to bed, and I wake up, and the ring is on my nightstand, sitting perfectly where it usually does. Am I going crazy? I've always dealt with spirits. I believe I do have a haunted doll in my room, but she usually never makes this disappear. Usually when I realise the ring is gone and I ask for it to reappear, it will. Do you guys think this is paranormal or something else? I was really young, always had a bad feeling about this house, would constantly have bad dreams. But one time I swear I heard 2 people talking, and one was a female, and I remember my bed shaking, like almost vibrating. But I figured that was because of me, because of how scared I was. Any other time I would be calling my mom to come get me, she'd come downstairs, grab me, and we'd go upstairs. Eventually she had enough and just moved my room next to hers upstairs. Things seemed to chill out for a bit. Couple years pass, get a teacup Yorkie dog, my little homie. So he's small as heck, and my mum hated him being on beds and couches, etc. And he can't jump high enough to get on these things, so I always put him up to whatever I was on. But one day I got home from school and I was searching for him, couldn't find him. Decided to check my mum's room. He was just laying on a bed. I'd never leave him on there because mum would get mad, and the bed is pretty high up. Like I remember jumping to get on it, so there's no way he could jump up. And I know for a fact no one would put him on furniture, especially my mum's bed. Another time, I was chilling with my friend. We heard the garage door slam shut. Didn't even hear it open, although we weren't listening for it. Though it was my brother, but he wasn't home. Another time with the dog again. He had a toy he never played with. It was like a toy dog that would make noise if you touched it. Me and my friend were downstairs and we heard it go off. We freaked out and ran upstairs. Later came down to take out the batteries. And last one, I swear. I was chilling all alone at home in the downstairs living room, next to my room. Because as I got older, I moved back downstairs. And I heard a plastic grocery bag being moved around, like it sounded like if someone was putting into a ball. I don't know what any of this means, but it really freaked me out. I recently moved into a new apartment about a month and a half ago, and ever since, there's been something here with me. I'm not quite sure if I'm an empath or medium. I just know I hear, see, and feel things. So maybe my first week there, little things would happen that I wasn't too sure was happening, because I don't really pay attention to. Like the shower curtain left open, cabinets left open, things moved when I knew where I left them, in a certain spot. About 2 days after that, I came home from work and it was a weird quietness. Felt like someone was just here before I was, and they were hiding in the closet. I sat on my couch in silence, embracing the weirdness, and got dressed, and didn't think of it the rest of the night. Another few days go by and I'm cooking. I hear my phone ringing in the living room, go to answer it, and hear a bang in the kitchen. I went back to see what it was, and there's a saucepan sitting directly in the middle of the kitchen, as if placed there. Not like it fell and rolled. This is where shit gets weird. A few days ago, I was having company, and they were knocking on the door. I was in my living room watching TV. I heard the first knock, then a second knock quicker and with more intention. I walked and got the door and said, "Why are you banging?" They just said, "Were you just at?" I told them the living room. Why? I said, "Nah." "'Cause you were just standing at the door looking at me and wouldn't answer, so I thought you were playing because you walked away." Scared the fuck out of me, because that wasn't possible. Tried to recreate what she had seen, to no avail. She just kept saying it was me, and I was playing. I kept reassuring her I wouldn't do that. She said she banged harder because she didn't want to tell me, but she realised it wasn't me moments before I got to the door. A couple of nights ago, it was about 3:40 or so in the morning, and I had to piss. Opened the door to the bathroom, which I keep closed because it creeps me out, and always feels like someone is watching when you walk past. And I could hear a woman humming. Subtle, but loud enough. Strange things happen here, like someone will say randomly, "What? I thought you said something," or "I thought something touched me just now." Well, people don't think twice of it. But I do, especially when I'm home alone. My family is Cambodian and moved to New York City during the Khmer Rouge Rebellion. There were about 9 of us living in a 3-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn on Linden Boulevard. We go to Wat Temple every Sunday. I was about 7 or 8 years old and slept with my grandma every night to keep her company. One morning, I woke up to her yelling my name because she fell and hit her head on the nightstand. I quickly got up and ran like hell to grab my uncle to help her back up. My grandmother had diabetes and had trouble walking and bathing, etc. It was Sunday and we were all getting ready to go to the temple. We all piled up in the van and headed out. When we all got out of the van, my uncle helped my grandmother up the stairs. As soon as her foot hit the first step of the temple, she just froze. Standing there for a couple of seconds, before collapsing. A heart attack. Everyone was yelling, the kids were crying. My uncle started performing CPR, or at least attempting to. He didn't even know what was going on, but was trying to save a life. The paramedics were called and arrived shortly after. The sounds of the sirens sounded like a scary banshee wailing and floating towards us at a fast speed. Chills me to this day. They took her to the hospital with my uncles, while the kids and my aunt stayed behind. The elders and monks called everyone in to pray for my grandmother. After we were done, we all went back to the apartment and waited on any news about my grandmother. Shortly after, we got a call from my uncle. He said she had passed. I love my grandmother, although she wasn't the nicest person in the world. Pretty sure to outsiders, and led the household with an iron fist. She loved her family. In the Khmer culture, my elders told me when you die, your spirit has 3 days to walk the earth before your past judgment. And your oldest child has to shave all their hair. Yes, eyebrows and everything. Then live with the monks for 3 days and nights and pray. My father had to take that role. My experience. The same day of her passing, my dad left to stay at the temple. My aunt has always been terrified of my grandmother because she was kind of mean. So mean she threw a meat cleaver at one of my uncle's girlfriend back in the day. It was only me, my older sister, my aunt and my little cousin of about 1 year old in the apartment. It started getting dark and my aunt was the only adult in the apartment. She told us to stay together because she was scared. We were all crying and exchanging stories about my grandmother, but were interrupted by pans flying and crashing in the kitchen. My aunt started weeping and told us this was the time my grandma usually eats. It really spooked me because it seemed like my grandmother didn't know she was dead. A couple of hours later, about 8 p.m, we heard a loud banging in my grandmother's room. We were too scared to go look because no one was in there, so we all stayed in the living room and waited for my uncle to get home. But I recognised that sound. My grandma had a TV that would short out and show a white horizontal line, and you would have to bang on it a couple of times before the picture showed back up. It sounded just like that banging. My uncle finally came home around 10 p.m. You could tell he was exhausted and sad. My aunt laid blankets on the living room floor and told my uncle everyone is sleeping in the living room because strange things are going on and she's scared. My uncle gave her an annoyed look and just said, all right. I was very scared that night and couldn't go to sleep. I knew it would end up being the last one awake. And to my horror, I was. I laid there all night praying for nothing to happen. It was about 3 or 4 hours later when the light in the hallway flipped on. I was spooked because I didn't hear anyone get up. I laid there for about 10 minutes when I heard the bathroom light turn on. By then, I knew exactly what was going on. It has to be my grandmother, I said to myself. I laid there staring at my little cousin's white crib mattress that was propped up against the wall, not moving an inch of my body. Shortly after, I heard something metal drop onto the bathtub. Remember my grandma had diabetes and couldn't bathe herself? So my uncle and dad used a small metal bowl to bathe her that we left in the bathroom. I'm 100% sure that's what I heard drop into the bathtub. Shortly after, I heard the tub water turn on and I could hear the water splashing against the tub. My stomach dropped and I felt like throwing up. I didn't hear anyone get up or any footsteps in the bathroom, and who the hell would be taking a shower this late at night? I was too terrified to move to wake my family up, so I just laid there. After about 5 minutes, the water finally turned off, and I heard the light switch flick, but the lights were still on. I figured it was the bathroom light. I was breathing very heavy and had a weird feeling, like whatever that was knew I was awake, so I closed my eyes. I heard what sounded like feet dragging against the floor coming towards the living room. It sounded just like my grandma when she would walk around the apartment with her flip-flops. She dragged her feet because diabetes made it hard for her to walk normally, so she used a cane. That sound got louder and closer. I opened my eyes and stared at the crib mattress and to my horror, saw what looked like my grandmother's silhouette being casted on the mattress that was up against the wall. It was getting closer, and still to this day, I don't understand why my family didn't wake up. When the footsteps got to where the doorway was, it just stopped. It seemed as if my grandmother was just standing there, watching all of us sleep. It felt like forever, but then the lights finally turned off. Then silence. The only other thing that happened that night was as an Asian calendar we had hung up in the living room that kept fluttering as if someone was constantly flipping through the pages. I ended up falling asleep shortly after that, probably due to the exhaustion, as I was still a kid. Growing up, every kid has this imaginary friend. Some parents played it cool, others just freaked out. I guess it's normal. But doing some research into the paranormal world, it actually came to me that those imaginary friends weren't so imaginary. There are a lot of people who can actually sense these things. They can see, hear, feel, smell, etc. spirits, but never really put some research into it. Starting at a young age, kids can start sensing it. Have you ever experienced a kid talking to someone, maybe a deceased family member, starting to tell you things like how your grandfather that died years ago called you some sort of nickname, or tells you about a place that you've been quite a few times but your kid wasn't, and you never talked about it? Yes, your kid is actually talking to him or her. But don't freak out, it's actually a wonderful gift that your kid has. After a few years, it might be gone, but some still carry it on in later life. As for me, I had a few incidents, such as seeing an older guy. For some reason, the family named him George. I remember he was wearing a black hat and he wore a suit. But thinking about it, I guess the entire family saw him, as of how they reacted after he walked towards me. Guess he was just the ghost of the house and made his presence noticeable to everyone. He didn't do harm to anyone else on a side note. As years goes by, I've heard a lot of paranormal stories about in the house. Fast forward a few years later, we did build a house and everything was normal. One day, it just started where I thought I saw a reflection of an older woman in my window. But I wasn't scared, it was more like comfortable. 2011 I had a baby. Things seemed normal. Just at night, sometimes her toys would go off. Her turning 4, she used to tell us there's a girl with long hair and a dress. We had a friend come over once a week with her kids, and they would all just play. One day, the friend did get touched on the back while she thought was one of the kids, but they weren't even near her. Sometimes even drawers would open in the kitchen, which we all thought someone from the family would just play a prank on us. After that, it was normal, until 2019, where things got super crazy. Me being home alone, so I sat on my bed with my back turned to my closet, where all of a sudden the drawers started to open. I was freaked out. I grabbed my phone and started to record, being clueless at the time that I would actually record something. Asking things like, if you're here, let me know, or give me a sign. I would receive this, let's say not totally unfriendly answer, saying no. Just to be clear, I didn't listen to the audio yet. I'd go on with my questions, asking things like, who are you, but didn't receive anything. Until I asked what he or she wants, I got this response of, I want to help. Alright, me being done with all my questions, I started to listen to my recording. I was shocked. I sat there on my bed. I couldn't move anymore because I got so scared that I actually got an answer twice in one recording. One day, before that, things already got to get weird. We had boards in the wall, so I was letting the dogs out in the yard. I was home alone as usual, and I hear this loud noise from inside. First thing that came to my mind, I didn't close the freezer door right and everything fell out. So me walking into the kitchen, finding absolutely nothing. On my way out, I saw something unusual in the office, but just out of the corner of my eyes. So I looked into the room. Oh boy, there was a mess. It looked like someone aggressively yanked out all of the boards. Stuff was all over the room, which was weird, but that didn't come to me after everything else happened. So I went back to get the dogs in. I walked back, and the vacuum cleaner is standing in the middle of the hallway. Just after that day, random things would fall down like the watering can after talking about watering the plants. After things got so intense, we had someone come over to the house to check it out. This is where it started to get all weird. I would get super emotional in a specific room, and I had to leave immediately. It even got to the point where I think that the ghost of this super angry man went into me, making me feel his anger that we went and tried to get help. Just sitting there seeing shadow figures, hearing someone clear as day say something from upstairs. It was, let's say, a very eventful night. And of course, me reaching to this in a very weird way, they sacked me for like almost an hour. We moved out of this house a few months later. I must say it's nice to have a gift like that where you can communicate with the deceased. But on the other side, it's scary, not knowing to who or what you're talking to. I keep hearing ringing in my ear quite a few times a day. I try to ignore it, but sometimes I try to actually listen. But it makes me feel comfortable. I like to think it's the presence of my grandfather that died 2 years ago, who lived right next to us. Maybe he's just passing through the walls to check on us sometimes. I don't know. I like to talk to him in my thoughts. First off, let me get this straight. I do not believe in demons, ghosts, or any of that paranormal stuff. Most of the time when things I cannot explain happen, I brush it off as coincidences. Anyways, let me get to this story. I do not know exactly how long ago this was, but it happened when I was around 6 to 10 and was living in the projects. When I went to daycare, I remember the staff telling a story about how their grandmother or something like that had died. They claimed that their family member had been laying in bed when they had suddenly woken up and saw a black figure walk into the bathroom. So their family member got up and followed it into the bathroom and checked it out. Their family member died that same night. Now looking back on this is clearly fake, but this absolutely terrified me as a kid, and this is what prompted me to sleep with my covers over my eyes, and I still occasionally do. Anyways, shortly after that, I assume I started having sleep paralysis episodes frequently. I think it's best if I mention that I sleep on a bunk bed that would directly face my window that's visible from the end of the bed. I remember these episodes like they happened yesterday. The first episode happened when I had woken up in the middle of the night, in the pitch black dark. I then looked at the end of my bunk bed, and that's when I saw it. It was a tall black figure that was just barely taller than my bunk bed. It was completely black, with only white eyes. It did nothing but stood there. I couldn't speak or move. I was completely frozen. After this, I actually can't remember anything. I don't know what happened after this. All I know is I saw something staring right at me. Now, the second encounter is actually my worst and happened not long after the first. This time, it was not a shadow figure, but rather an old lady. It's very similar to the first one. Again, I had woken up in the middle of the night, and this time, I looked around my room and then looked at the foot of my bed. This time an old lady was clinging on the foot of the bunk bed. I was terrified as hell and tried to scream as loud as I could. But nothing. Nothing came out and I couldn't move. The thing then jumped onto my chest and just looked dead into my eyes. It became impossible to breathe and I thought I was going to die. Again, this is all I can remember. The last encounter I ever had at this house goes like this. I had fallen asleep one day, I assume, and had woken up. I couldn't move, and all I could do was look at the ceiling. I could, however, hear my parents talking from the living room, and that was all. I later then gained control and just got up, and I remember my sister telling me that I had been asleep for a whole day. After this, we lived at that place for a bit longer, and I never had an encounter again. But it doesn't stop there. We moved to the place I'm currently still living at, and this is actually the last paranormal event I've ever had at home. This happened maybe 2 years ago. I was playing Roblox on my Xbox all alone, since I had basically no friends, and still have really no friends except for 2. My room door was wide open, and I had my eyes locked on my TV. It was also completely silent, I should add. For some reason, I decided to look out my room door, and that's when I saw a little girl chasing something, running by the door and into my sister's room. Me being dumb, I got up and looked out into the hallway and saw nothing. My sister's door was shut and I didn't hear it open and shut. After that, I shut my door, locked it and called my mom and asked her if she could hurry up and come home. After this, nothing at this house that was paranormal ever happened again. I do, however, have times where I'll wake up and won't be able to move certain areas of my body and then be completely frozen. And to combat this, I have to jerk my body and try my best to move. I've been a skeptic, but always open-minded to the unexplainable. My parents believe in ghosts and have told me the stories when I was in my mid-teens about the first house we lived in when I was a baby, as well as the interactions I would have with ghosts as a baby. Now here is what happened at 4:30 a.m. today. I had stayed around my boyfriend's house for the night. I've never felt uncomfortable at night, but sometimes I feel like I'm being watched, but don't think much of it. I woke up at 4:30 a.m. randomly, feeling odd, like I was being watched. I turned to roll over, and as I got onto my back, I looked up, and there was this old man floating above the far corner of the bed. He had messy, medium-length hair, but balding, missing teeth, blue and white striped pajamas, a leather brown book and grey socks. He also had this faint blue or grey glow around him. He was extremely detailed, like he was in the light despite the room being pitch black. I let out a surprised, "Oh," because I jumped at the sight. He turned to face me, recognised that I could see him, almost shrugged. Then, as I'm shaking, my boyfriend wakes up. He turns and disappears through the ceiling. The last thing I see is his feet going through the ceiling. I looked online, but it's definitely not sleep paralysis, as I was moving, speaking and blinking. Even after turning to face my boyfriend and turning back, he was still in the same position. I didn't feel threatened or afraid, just a bit shocked, as anyone would be. If anyone could help me or give me advice, I'm just very confused. When I was in elementary school, I think 7 to 9 years old, I had a nightmare that for some reason I never forgot. The nightmare takes place at my grandmother's house, in the front yard. I remember sitting there and seeing a red cat floating. I knew that it was the ghost of a boy around the same age as me. That boy was throwing a ball at the wall of my grandma's house. I had a feeling that he wanted to play with me, but I was terrified. I wanted to run, scream, call for my grandmother, but I was paralysed. Meanwhile, the invisible kid kept playing with the ball like I wasn't there, but I knew it was him who wouldn't let me leave. Suddenly, my cries for help were answered, and a white winged horse came to me. I suddenly felt at peace, and the dream ended. It may all sound like the product of imagination. Maybe I've heard too many stories about angels and mystical beings and ghosts, and that's all it was, right? However, my brother is almost 9 years younger than me, so at the time I had this dream, he was either a baby or wasn't even born yet. So there's no way I told him about the dream at that time, or that he would remember it. I've never talked about my dreams with him prior to the incident I'm about to mention next. Years go by and I was now in my 20s, and my brother was a teenager. We were all at my grandma's house, parents and my aunt included, for a barbecue. While we were eating, we started to discuss paranormal stuff and dreams. For some reason, I remembered the dream and shared it with everyone. After I finished my story, my brother mentions that he dreamed about the same invisible boy with a cap when he was around the same age I was, when I had the dream. He mentioned that he felt terrified and paralysed too, but nobody came to save him, like in my case. I'm not sure if it's a weird coincidence, or if my grandmother's house is haunted. So last night, I was outside at around 9:30 p.m, digging up some mushrooms that I didn't know much about, so that the wild rabbits in the area wouldn't eat them, since they were near where we threw food scraps. I didn't have a flashlight or anything because the streetlights were just bright enough that I could make out what I was doing. This is kind of important later, in a way. I looked up because I heard a noise, and right now I don't even remember what the noise was. All I know is that my eyes made out what looked like a shitty Flipnote studio animation of a stick figure with no head, fucking booking it across my street. It looked like, height-wise, it was exactly half of the height of the closest street lamp, which was mounted to a standard electrical pole. You know when you've been staring at a very bright light source for a while, and then when you look away or blink, you can see the outline of that light kind of imprinted on your eyes for a bit? Like whatever shape the light was is dark, and then it was a sort of fuzzy grey haze around it. This is exactly what the stupid thing looked like. Dark with the hazy greys outline. Except it was moving. It was over so fast, and I even blinked a few times to try and see it again, because I genuinely thought that it was just that effect in my eyes. But I hadn't been using any flashlights, and the streetlights has a round, cloudy cover around the bulb, so I couldn't have even seen the light bulb itself in any way. I'm still not incredibly sure that this wasn't my eyes playing tricks on me. In fact, I'm really only about 80-60% sure that it was real. I'm just posting to share and see if anyone else has seen something similar. At least in the moment, it was scary to me, and I was so convinced that I'd seen it that I literally started crying back inside. And possibly being overdramatic. I just had no explanation. With the weather becoming warm again and our local parks opening, I now have to think of good reasons to turn down invitations to go camping from friends and family. While I was still a teenager, I went as often as I could. Any weekend I was free. I was in the woods relaxing. Sometimes I brought friends, sometimes I went by myself. After finishing school, my life had become fairly hectic. I still did my best to take a few camping trips during the year. I'm glad I was so stubborn about the idea of going out inside the woods when the chance arose, because I had met my husband on a camping trip. The story of how we met is a bit long and embarrassing on my part. I had gone out for a quick washroom break in the middle of the night. An owl of some sort or other, screeching night creature, startled me, and I took off running back to where I thought my tent was. In the darkness of the moonless night, I caught a tree root and broke my ankle. I was unable to move until morning. I was in so much pain, I accepted my death, ready to be a nice meal for wildlife. I was rescued by Nicholas. Even back then, he was a large, intimidating-looking man. Full beard, axe in hand, he looked about ready to chop me up into pieces. My husband-to-be was cursed with looking the complete opposite of his nature. He carried me out of the woods and came to the hospital with me because none of my family members were available at such short notice. We've barely been apart since that day and married the moment it was legal. We met in the woods, so camping held a special meaning to us. Every trip was almost like a honeymoon. Although we thought we clearly looked like a loving couple on our trips, most people we met didn't clue into that fact. They all assumed we were just two good friends drinking beer and fishing. It was a game of ours to play it cool and see how long it would take people to start questioning things. Near the end of the summer, we reserved one spot in a popular local area. The camping areas were spread out far enough for some sort of privacy, but a family we often camped close by and met at the lake for fishing still had no idea about us after 4 years of seeing each other. They saw our wedding rings and commented how nice it was for two good friends to be away from our wives for a long weekend. Being in the woods holds such good memories for me, but it only takes one night to ruin everything. After what happened last summer, I've refused to ever be in the forest again. The last time we went, it was a very normal experience. Because we were veterans at that point, setting up our campsite took an hour at most. Before anyone else had really arrived and finished setting up, Nicholas had gathered firewood, and I had started to walk down to the lake. If I was lucky enough, I would catch something for our lunch, but we always brought something for a backup, just in case nothing was biting. Sitting on the edge of the calm lake, I started to bait my hook and set up my fishing rod. It was still a little cool from the early morning. By the afternoon, I was certain it would warm up. I feared for summer storms rolling in, because the radio on the way down warned of thunderstorms over the weekend. That morning, the weather was perfect. I got comfortable and threw out an almost perfect cast. I was waiting for Nicholas to come and join me when I saw a blur of white through the trees on the other side of the lake. I had to squint, but I could have sworn I saw a person walking through the trees, getting closer to the lake's edge. When the figure stopped at the edge of the water, I lifted my hand to give them a friendly wave. I thought it was a woman. I couldn't see any features besides a white dress and long hair flowing in the breeze. She must have seen me from across the lake, because she raised her arm and waved back. "Who are you waving at?" I nearly jumped out of my skin. Nicholas was pretty silent for a man his size. Without me hearing him, he'd come up behind me. A woman over there. She must be out for a walk, because there aren't any campsites on the other side of the lake. I don't see her. I raised my eye in confusion at him. I'd only turned away for a second. I didn't think she could go back into the woods so fast. But when I looked back, she was gone. The lake rippled slightly from the breeze. I didn't even hear the normal bird song or see any of the friendly waterfowl that made the lake their home. I didn't think I imagined her or got confused by a reflection off the lake, but it wasn't really that big of a deal. I dropped the matter and helped set up a spot for Nicholas. While he was been collecting firewood, he had run into one of the regulars we often saw at the park camping. We often shared anything we fished up with them. Due to a medical emergency, they had to leave the campgrounds. Their son had gotten very sick, and they weren't going to risk him sleeping it off. They had grabbed their important items in a hurry. They knew that myself and Nicholas would be close by, and came over asking for a favour. They trusted us to break down their campsite, and pleaded for us to watch over their bigger items. If they didn't come back for them at the end of the weekend, we could leave their things at the ranger's office. Nicholas agreed. I hoped their son would be all right. He may have got away from his parents and eaten a berry he shouldn't have. We would gladly watch over their things. It would be the first year at this site without something being close by. The rest of the day went by completely normal. We broke down our camping neighbour's site and cooked up the 2 fish I had caught. A bit on the small size, but they'd do. The only strange thing I noticed during the day was how silent the woods were. I barely heard any birds, and they sounded very far away when they chirped. We both turned in shortly after the sun had set. We had plans to go on a long hike the next day. Being well rested would be a good idea. I was getting older and wondering how much longer I could sleep on the hard ground. Being wrapped in big, comfortable arms did help. I don't know how it started, but we made a game for nights we couldn't fall asleep. One of us would start with an animal or with a weapon. Then the next person would say another animal with a different weapon that could beat the first in a fight. It would quickly get into ridiculous territory, like a shark riding an army of crabs as its weapon. Whoever laughs first loses. We spent many nights snuggled close and giggling like teen girls on a sleepover. A falcon with a fencing sword, Nicholas started off. I raise you a parrot with double daggers, those wavy ones. Shoot, that's a good one. An ostrich. No weapon, it's just really mean. I felt a giggle start bubbling up and I forced it down. I paused to think of something not ready to back up our game, but a noise outside our tent made me stop. I sat up slightly, trying to hear better. I could have sworn I heard a scream. I had been out in the woods often enough to know what the wildlife sounded like. This was for certain a human scream. It sounded off in the distance. The trees muted sounds, so I wondered just how close the person was. I heard it again. A long wailing screech that made my stomach drop. Did you... I started to speak, but Nicholas grabbed me and forced me back down. He held me tightly, and it was somewhat out of character for him. The suddenness in his mood shift frightened me more than the faint screaming sound. Nick, I said, but was quickly shushed by him. I looked up at him in the darkness, trying to make out his expression. I could feel his hands shaking slightly against me, and I couldn't remember ever seeing him scared. He was a big, tough, brave husband. The one who answered phone calls and ushered spiders out of the house. He was scary and strong, and could chop firewood in one swing, and yet he was holding onto my small frame, as if some sort of protective ward against whatever was outside. My heart was beating so fast, I nearly didn't hear what had scared him so badly. I heard a crunching noise of footsteps outside. Someone was wandering around our campsite. I suddenly knew why Nicholas shushed me. The only weapon we had was the axe for firewood. The axe I was pretty sure had been left outside our tent. We also had bear mace, but it was pretty old. And if the wind blew the wrong way, the bear mace would just be a setback. I held my husband as I tried to listen for more footsteps, praying I was just hearing things. Our food had been put up. We knew how to keep animals away. The soft crunching of dirt didn't sound like a large creature walking around. But I heard breathing, heavy breathing, that did sound like it belonged to a bear. My mind started to race. I wondered if some crazy person who lived in the woods year-round came across our campsite and just wanted to steal food. I didn't know what to do at that moment. I wanted them to just leave. My big, scary-looking husband may be able to frighten them away, but if they had a gun, we couldn't do anything about it. And then there was that screaming. I could still hear the soft footsteps and heavy breathing coming from outside. Go away, go away, go away. In that moment, I was so frozen in fear, I couldn't do much else but repeat that mantra, hoping my mental prayer would be enough to force the unwanted guests away. Nicholas had been doing much more than thinking than myself. He had wrapped his arms around me and buried me so close to him that if someone opened the tent, it would look like he was alone. If someone attacked, they would go for him first, unaware of the smallest second person in the tent. It would give me the chance to attack back or by some miracle get away. We couldn't go outside. It was clear by the footsteps there was more than one person. The best plan we had was to be quiet and hope the people left. If they took our supplies, we didn't mind paying for new ones. I was still scared out of my mind when I heard a new noise. My lungs felt like they would burst from fear when I heard the tent zipper start to move. So slowly, I watched out of the corner of my eye as it started to open from the top. I couldn't see outside, even when it was halfway open. I felt Nicholas tent up. He may jump up and defend us at any second. I didn't want that. I didn't want him to be hurt. I just wanted whoever was out there to go away. The zipper stopped halfway. I hoped it would remain like that. I still heard the breathing of the person outside. To my horror, I saw something come into our tent. A clawed hand. The claws were curled up and the size of my fingers. Even in my fear, I thought it was a joke, some sort of costume prop. No animal I knew of had hands so human-like, and no human had claws. I wondered if some other camper decided to pull a prank on us. A single claw reached down and started to force the zipper open more. This had to be a joke. It had to be. A smell came in with a small breeze. It was a little musty and somewhat similar to wet fur. I didn't know what we would do once the zipper was fully open and we could see what was outside. But thank God, we never needed to find out. I heard a scream. It was so loud it sounded like it came from directly behind our tent. I jumped up and muffled my own scream into Nicholas's chest. The scream kept going. A long wail of true and utter fear. Whoever was outside was either startled by the scream or decided to follow it. The screaming sound started to move away from our tent, and the footsteps and heavy breathing followed. I don't know how long we stayed, just holding each other listening. It felt like hours, but it was only a few minutes. I let out a small noise when my husband shot up and bolted outside. He came back a few seconds later, holding our firewood axe. Both of us sat, facing the now closed tent flap, axe at the ready. And we sat like that the entire night. I was so wired, I was wide awake when the light became grey outside our tent. During the rest of the night, I heard no one back in our camp, but I still heard that horrible scream from time to time, in the distance. Our plan was to pack up as fast as we could and leave the equipment we had been guarding at the ranger station. Aside from odd tracks all over our campsite, nothing had been disturbed and touched. They looked almost human, but with what looked like claw marks dragging in the dirt. Hey folks, early morning. We both jumped at the voice. I let out a small scream I wasn't proud of, but when we spun around, we saw a forest ranger. I knew his face from years of coming here, but not his name. He noticed our fear and held out a hand, trying to calm us. You two all right? Did you see a bear or something? He asked. Or something, Nicholas confirmed. The next few minutes was us telling the ranger what had happened last night. I was still shaking, so Nicholas took over speaking. But what confused me was he didn't mention the screaming that scared off our unwanted guests. That sounds strange, right? Maybe some kids are playing a prank, the ranger said with a shrug. There was screaming. I stuttered, and both men looked at me. I heard screaming all night. Well, you always had better hearing than me. Maybe someone was off in the woods trying to scare us, Nicholas said with a nod. It worked, I grumbled. Alright, we'll look into this. Prank or not, this isn't acceptable. Aside from that, I came down here to tell you folks there is a storm blowing in soon. It's up to you if you want to stay, but I would advise against it. It's going to be a really bad one, and the last time we had a storm, these bad people got blown away with their tents. If you want to pack up, we'll refund you for the last 2 days you paid for. We were going to leave either way. The storm just gave us a good excuse. The ranger was kind enough to help us carry the extra gear after we told him it belonged to the campers who left the other day. He would walk with us back to the ranger station. We didn't want a refund for our last 2 days. We wouldn't be camping for. It would be a donation to help the park pay for whatever was needed. Our campsite was empty. All 3 of us were ready to go. And it was a good thing we left when we did. If we stayed, we would have died or gotten very hurt. We had only been a few feet away from the site when a massive crack and horrible sound came behind us. I had just calmed down a little bit, but the thundering sound made me cry out again and jump nearly 10 feet in the air. All of us turned, trying to figure out what had made such a sound. Where our empty campsite had been was now covered with a dead tree that had just fallen over. It crashed right on top of where our tent would have been. I was certain if we'd stayed there, that tree would have killed us. All 3 of us stood in shock, staring at the fallen tree. I started to walk up it for a reason I didn't know. I just felt like I had to get a better look. Our campsite had been ruined, littered with fallen branches. Nicholas had come up and took my arm to gently take me back onto the path. We didn't know if the tree had knocked against another, making it more likely to fall as well. That area was dangerous. I let myself be guided back, but I saw the base of the fallen tree. From the freshly upturned roots, I thought I saw something tangled in the brown roots. Something white and straight sticking out of the ground. Something that looked like a human femur. We got to the ranger station and made a more official report of our night. The sky had already darkened, the storm coming in faster than expected. Other rangers had gone off to warn people, and the parking lot was slowly emptying out of cars of campers who wisely decided to leave. I called the ranger office a week after asking about if they ever found out who had tried scaring us away. The ranger who picked up the phone was the one we dealt with, so he was glad to talk with me. We hadn't found out anything. The park emptying made it hard, and the storm washed away anything useful. He also wanted to tell me something. He didn't know if he was legally allowed to yet, but he didn't want me to find out later and get freaked out. The tree that had fallen over did in fact have human remains tangled into the roots. They found one intact femur and some broken bones looking like ribs. When they started looking, they found more bones buried and scattered around. They assumed the body had been there for years, and they hadn't found enough to determine who they were or how they died. Also tangled in with the roots was some fabric that looked like it had been a white dress or skirt at some point. For those past few years, we had camped right next to a human body without ever knowing. If that tree hadn't fallen over, I doubted they ever would have been found. I didn't tell Nicholas what I had found out. I think he doesn't want to upset me by talking about the trip. He didn't seem very bothered over what had happened, but knows it stressed me out. I had nightmares for months. I tried to keep an eye on seeing that there were any updates on the case, but accept the fact they most likely won't ever know who died or had been buried beneath that tree. For how many people go missing in the woods, I think camping near a death site is pretty common. More common than what most people would think.